Hi, this is Jeff with the INTJ equation, and today I'm joined by Joyce Meng. She has her own YouTube channel that you can find, and also she's writing a book as well. Joyce, would you like to tell the people about you a bit?
Hey everyone, my name is Joyce and I have a YouTube channel that is literally my full name. And I'm excited to be here. The book that I'm writing about is my theory on type. And right now I'm trying to figure out what to name it. Right now, the lame name for it right now is the combination model. So it's basically combining different schools of thought and what I find valid in it in assessing type. And yeah, I'm excited to release that sometime next year.
Is that like a self-published thing, or have you found a publisher?
Self-publishing.
Okay, that's cool. Sometime next year. Look forward to that. All right, and you also have a YouTube channel, which we talked about a little bit, where you kind of interview anybody and everybody, right? In these big panel, usually like these panel interviews, and kind of compare and contrast people of the same type and same temperament and things like that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to collect 3D descriptions of the types. So having people in their own words describe how it's like to be them. It adds a personal touch to the theory. So it's not just reading a 2D description, but you get to actually hear people and how it's like to use their functions in real time.
Yeah, I've watched quite a few of her videos, and I'll put it down in the description below once I release this podcast. That's a very cool information there. So you're also an MBTI practitioner too. I don't know if you just mentioned that right now.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you do typings on your channel.
I do. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. All right. So in your experiences, what is it like to be an INFJ?
Your mind is always looking for the why or the insight behind things. You never really see things just as they are, but you try to find some sort of hidden meaning or why to it. I find that with your introverted intuition, sometimes you're looking for what will be in the future. And for some people, this shows up as future pacing. In other ways, it can show up as kind of knowing the ripple effect of things and how things lead to a central concept, a main concept that comes in cycles. And so understanding patterns and understanding how they play out over time, across time, is something, a part of the INFJ experience, or at least part of my experience. It could be a subtype of INFJ, it doesn't have to apply for everyone. And with extroverted feeling, with the actions that I do, I often care about how it'll make other people feel. And so oftentimes I'm very considerate of how the words I'll say will land with other people and how it'll affect them. And so oftentimes I'm kind of looking to see, will it cause a positive outcome or a negative outcome? Because I don't want to make people sad. And so my my desire is to meet people's needs, and so figure out ways to do that, and on large scale ways too. So I want to understand the root cause to why people don't feel good in their lives, so the root or the TI framework for why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, and so that I can help them in the long term solve their problems, so that we're not just doing band-aid solutions, but we're doing as permanent solutions as we can, getting at the source, at the essence of human issues, and making sure that people have happier relationships. And so I personally am drawn to counseling and therapy for those reasons, and I'm planning to get my PhD in those areas. And another part of extroverted feeling is I know what not to say sometimes too. So sometimes I'll think of something and I realize that it could offend someone or it could hurt someone because it's too blunt, and I'll be able to catch it before I even say it. So it's preventing offense before it happens. And with my introverted thinking, I can be a little bit intellectual sometimes too. So I may be warm on the outside with the extroverted feeling, but inside I might feel very analytical. And the side of me kind of wants to understand the puzzles behind people and humanity and the human condition. It allows me to understand how humans work, just like how for possibly STPs, like they like to figure out how impersonal things work, like a car engine for some of them. For me, I like to figure out how people work, just how they function like a car engine, but I don't care about car engines. I care about people engines.
Yeah.
And so that's a concern. There's also extroverted sensing. And so at times, I can find it a little hard to be extremely spontaneous if someone just kind of throws me a wrench in my plan. The interruption can be jarring. Sometimes it can be hard to know sometimes how to adjust to that, but sometimes it can also be very pleasant in the form of overindulgence. So sometimes when I'm stressed, there is this urge to overindulge and take sensory experiences to their extreme for short periods of time, but very like strong, controlled short periods of time, bursts, binges of SE. So that's my experience of it.
Yeah, definitely have that struggle too, especially with like overeating. When I get like bored or stressed or something like that, I'll just eat. It's a big problem that I have.
I feel you there.
Yeah. All right. So how'd you come about being an MBTI practitioner? Are you a therapist right now? Do you have your master's or?
I am getting my PhD in psychology, and then I'm going to
Oh,
go back to do therapy. And so currently I am studying through one of the schools about those subjects right now. It's going to take a while though. There's a joke about how you have to be old to be a therapist, and it's sadly true. And so, because there's so much training involved, I'm already people's therapist without the formal education anyway. People just come to me to vent their problems and their secrets.
I used to work with a therapist that was 21. She actually just started and she was 21. It's pretty crazy.
Lucky.
I guess I don't know. Here they expedited. I don't know because you're in Canada.
Yeah.
So you're going to grad school right now. Usually, like from what I hear from grad school, they take like typology and MBTI. It's pretty much a joke there. It isn't where you're at.
That's interesting. I think that they might in some areas, but I don't think that they do in my area. So I did my undergraduate in human resources, and actually one of our assignments is to write a report on our 16 type results. So I literally had to write a report on that. So I think to an extent it is accepted, and people kind of do see the validity to it, because even without knowing the model, you can still see it in people. And there's just this innate human curiosity going like, why are people like that? I can already, with my eyes, with my SE, I can tell that these patterns do exist, but what is the explanation for what's behind that? And so I find a lot of people can find it valid because of that, because it gives them language to phenomenon they've been viewing their whole life. Whereas I think some areas might be skeptical of typology because people apply it to areas where it's questionable. So with the workplace, sometimes people will apply type to sort out people for the job, which is ridiculous. And when you're certified in the MBTI, they tell you strictly it is unethical, and you're really violating some moral codes if you apply it to sort out people in the workplace. Yet people still do it, and I don't think it's the instrument's fault. It's just like with guns, it's not like the gun is shooting people, it's people using the gun to shoot people, type of thing. Or even like a cooking utensil to cook amazing 5-star food for people, or you could use it to cook people. So I mean the tool is up to you how you use it, is the point. And so MBTI, or the 16 types, have a bad rep because of how it's utilized in workplaces to discriminate. Even though people in the community know to not use it for that means, there's still the black market 16 types that's being sold and used to select people for roles, which is not great. You're supposed to use the instrument after someone's already in the role, and then you figure out how they can best flourish in that role, but not as a gatekeeper.
Okay, I've been in the workforce for almost 20 years and I've had many, many jobs. I've never had an MBTI test or anything at any of the jobs. It's kind of weird. I don't know if it's like a corporate thing or what kind of jobs do they usually do those in?
It's corporate.
Corporate. Okay, I've never been like a corporate job or anything like that. I know I talked to I know therapy is a really popular way for INFJs to go. I used to work in behavioral health with kids with behavioral health issues, and I had an INFJ therapist I used to talk to. And she actually said that she, in grad school, they did it one day and they pretty much just dismissed it totally as a joke, basically.
Oh, they take it a little more seriously in Canada.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Definitely something that we need to look into. I'm a little skeptical of MBTI itself, but I'm sure that gets lumped in with like the tests online, like 16 personalities and stuff like that. How does like the actual MBTI tests compare to like these online tests you can take?
Yeah, 16 personalities always gets called MBTI. So when people say, I've taken the MBTI, 95% of the time they're actually saying, I took 16 personalities. And in my mind, I associate these things as the same thing. And so oftentimes you'll hear people with completely incorrect test results saying, I am this type. And you're like, nope, totally. There's no way you're that type. And then people then blame it on the MBTI because people will call it that. But
Mhm.
I view it as a mislabeling. The MBTI is an instrument that has decades worth of research under it. So it's been tested and retested, and there's a certain level of validity and reliability something needs to become an official instrument. So it meets the caliber of an instrument, a credible instrument to take. Um, so what the official MBTI is during the training, what they teach you is I know the dichotomies is not the best. They go through the dichotomies and then they also have a short section on the functions, but they don't completely leave it out. They actually keep it in the training. And so with the MBTI step 2, you'll have a facet report. So each dichotomy actually has 5 facets to it, and it creates a richness because you can be really high in one of the facets, but really low in some of the facets. But it's the holistic feel of the report that lands you a certain way versus another. And something that can affect your test results is your stage of life. So that can alter what your true type is, which is why they say you have to take it with a practitioner too. You just can't take the test alone and see it as a valid result. It's more of a starting place. And then you have the practitioner to calibrate to make sure you've typed right.
Okay. So, like, what are some steps becoming an MBTI practitioner? How can somebody find an MBTI practitioner to type themselves?
Yeah, they can find it on a website near them. There's always certifying workshops around them. There are also alternatives to it. So if you want to get certified, there are different pathways you can take. You don't have to take the official MBTI. You can get certified by Personality Hacker. They have a training program which teaches people how to profile people through speaking with them. So conversational profiling, they teach that. And so you can get certified with them, or you can get certified with Linda Behrens. She has a 3-lens approach: interaction styles, which is 4 interaction styles: in charge, get things going; behind the scenes, chart the course.
Mhm.
And she has the essential motivators too, which are essentially Kiersey's temperaments. So NF, NT, SJ, SP, and cognitive dynamics, which is the cognitive functions. And you use all 3 to triangulate your type. You don't just use one lens. And so I would recommend that for everyone when finding your type. Never just rely solely on one source, but see if you triangulate all of these multiple sources, what really lands the best. And so I find with the community, sometimes there is a meme worship. So sometimes people will read a meme and then see it as the ultimate source of information.
Yeah.
And so some of them are accurate and some of them are not accurate, depending on where you get it from. And so it's always good to get a lot of data points, and that will help you on your journey. So the more information, the merrier. Sometimes people preemptively stop their journey at a certain source, but I would say keep searching and see if your type fits on all levels. And that is the most confirming. So yeah, that's my advice on if someone wants to pursue certification.
That's a good way of looking at it, because I kind of like to do it conversationally too. I haven't really started typing people very much, like as a service or anything, with my hellacious schedule, and I'm just kind of beginning here. But yeah, I kind of just listening to people, basically observing, I can kind of figure out their type that way. And I do like to use like the interaction styles myself, and I kind of find temperament and I kind of narrow it down that way. That I use the cognitive functions to try to narrow it down even more. So you did an interview with Linda Behrens. I thought it was very interesting. So you said you're a student of hers, right? Yeah.
I am, yeah.
And like when you're typing somebody, how do you utilize her interaction styles exactly?
Yeah, so if their interaction style is obvious, I will take that into account. People with get things going, so this would be the ESFP, ESFJ, and the ENFP and ENTP. I would kind of see that because of the high energy approach. They want to get an embraced result. So they're going to have really good vibes with them. Their vibe will bring up the collective group's vibe. And you can just feel interaction styles sometimes. With in charge, they might like to have fun, like get things going, but at the end of the day, they want to get things done. So this will cause some types to look like other types. So interaction styles is very important sometimes to take into account. With the ESTP and the ISTP, they have direct interaction styles.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they have directive communication. And so it can look like TE. And so it's easy to mistype those two types as TJ users when they're actually TPs.
Yeah.
And so that's why interaction styles is so useful. You also learn that ENFJs are in charge. So they might come across as a little more get things done than you would expect from an ENFJ. So that's something to take into account too. So interaction styles adds a unique flavor to type, and get behind the scenes and chart the course is an interesting differentiation too. Chart the course people are really good at keeping people on track. So they're good at directing the movement and moving things forward. Whereas behind the scenes, they like to stay behind the scenes, but they like to help from taking what you've already done and just adding and supplementing from a behind the scenes role. And so you'll notice that some people have really clear interaction styles and some don't. And so I love using that lens when it sticks out. And I apply that with every other model. Sometimes it's very obvious when you see a certain cognitive function, but sometimes it's really not. And so my approach is the low-hanging fruit. Whatever I see hanging the most is what I'll grab onto, and then I'll try to disprove it if I feel like I've reached a conclusion.
Yeah, I think interaction style is a big missing piece of the puzzle, and it kind of made me a lot of sense, and it kind of gave me a lot of like self-growth and development. I got the book somewhere on my shelf. I don't know where it's at exactly, but definitely like an INTJ's chart the course type, right? I know kind of like it's kind of like behind the scenes in a way, but yeah, like we kind of direct people, kind of push them the right way to get the big picture connected.
Yeah. And INFJ is also chart the course too.
Yeah.
So they actually come across as a little more serious than you think that an INFJ would come across, because chart the course types have a serious and intentional demeanor to them. So what Linda will also teach is the surface manifestations of the interaction styles too. And it's actually behind the scenes that is more flowy and has more of a feminine energy to it as well. It's the get things going and behind the scenes that have a more flowy feminine touch to it that you'd expect from FE users, but FE users who are also in charge or chart the course can seem a little more serious, and it fills in a lot of gaps. I agree, Jeff.
And these are just preferences, really. It's not like set in stone. Like if you're an INTJ, INFJ, you're not a chart the course type. You can kind of use other interaction styles, right?
You can fluctuate throughout interaction styles, depending on your course of life, your cultural upbringing, and what's required of you. And so that goes the same with the dichotomies too.
Yeah.
People hate the dichotomies because they don't want to be in a box. But the truth is actually you use them to different extents depending on your life situation. And so you might be an INTJ, but you might appear way more extroverted than the average INTJ. And it's just because your life requires you to do so. And the same thing is with the interaction styles. You might have a natural interaction style, but you can always modify it depending on what life is asking you to be. And so when people say you are set in stone with something, that clearly goes against type, because type is just your innate preference without behavioral modifications for your circumstance. But your circumstance can change so much about how you appear. And that includes your interaction styles and everything else.
Yeah, I worked in corrections for 5 years, so it's kind of like you need to be very upfront and direct, which INTJs can do, but you kind of like be a in charge type there and kind of have to get in people's faces and verbally direct people. So I mean, you can definitely like kind of go off on a limb and do other interaction styles. I think that's a pretty good example where I had, and I think that's kind of like the big five. That's one big criticism I have, like kind of treats introversion like a disease in a lot of ways, it seems like. I think just Western society in general treats introversion like it's, a mental illness, basically, when it's not really. I mean, it could definitely lead to it, of course, or it could be very, very low. Like I score very, very low on introversion, but like I mentioned in our podcast that we did with Kaseo Chan, like I have the Avoidant Personality Disorder, and that's just been a part of my development.
Yeah. And so the big five, there's clearly some dimensions you want to be stronger in than others. Like no one wants to be low in openness. That just sounds really bad. And who wants to be high in neuroticness? That sounds like you are feeling bad your entire life. And so there's clearly one dimension that sounds better than the other dimension, which is kind of sad. And then you'll have movements trying to advocate for the complete opposite side.
Yeah.
So Susan Cain's book, Quiet, it's saying introverts are awesome and extroverts suck. And so you have these two sides battling against each other, when in my opinion, both are true. They both have their positives and negatives in different circumstances, in my opinion.
Well, I read Susan Cain's book too. I don't think it's really saying that extroverts suck per se. I was just thinking like there's a place for introverts too, and she does talk about some of the strengths extroverts do have. I think she's just trying to point out like, hey, if somebody's quiet to themselves, it doesn't mean they have no value.
That is true. Yeah, I misspoke. Yeah, her book is lovely. I didn't mean to.
Oh, yeah, I don't put you on a spot or anything. Okay. I want to go back a little bit what you said, like you're talking about the MBTI dichotomies, and you said that there's can't remember exactly what you said, some other kind of like spectrums, kind of like the big five is on the dichotomies. Is that what you're getting at?
There is a spectrum. Yeah. So you can score high and low on certain facets, but overall your score leans more towards a certain area. And so with that, it's important to take into account where you are at in your life, because you might score out of your preference if your work style or your family style causes you to use the other side more. So there's that too. So it's always good to double check with someone else to make sure you've correctly typed yourself. But also another person can also be off course. So you may get typed by someone and they might actually be wrong about your type. So this is also important to self-calibrate too. So it's to find the perfect balance between that.
Okay, so compare like you're giving type by an actual MBTI practitioner and you're taking like an online test. I think the online tests are maybe 45%, 50% accurate at best. What do you say like a MBTI practitioner, like a real seasoned one is? What's the accuracy rate there? I'm sure it's not 100%, of course.
I would say that it's 80%,
80.
probably. Yeah.
Okay.
The official statistic is there's a 90% chance they'll get 3 letters right, and there's a 75% chance it'll get all 4 letters right. And so they say it explicitly, because you ultimately need someone to make sure you are correctly typed, because self-report is flawed in general. no matter if it's a cognitive function test or a dichotomy test. For instance, with Dario Nardi's cognitive function test, I've had people take it and not get their actual type on it too.
Mhm.
So every test has self-report error, no matter how amazing it is.
Yeah, it's just like test in general. I think test in school just to test how much knowledge or how much you can cram in a few days and kind of forget. I just very skeptical of tests in general. I think it's just a real life application. But and another thing too, I know like the MBTI was actually like the start, like a big starting point for self-reporting data just for psychology in general. And I agree with you that it's very flawed, even like studies. And I think people have an over reliance on studies. And another big criticism of MBTI because there's not a whole lot of empirical data on it. Is there, or that I'm
There's a
something wrong with
lot of empirical data on the MBTI.
it? Is there?
Yeah, you get trained and you get told that there's a lot of empirical. There's decades worth of it. And you'll see it if you go to the official database too.
Okay.
And so it is backed up by a lot of information. Except data from studies is always going to be flawed with human error. So it doesn't matter if this is the MBTI or an emotional intelligence test or even the Big Five, the way that they collect data, it's not always the most pure. So you're going to run into that error. I just think there's always going to be a level of human interference that prevents perfection, is my thoughts. So when someone tells you a test they got on a thing that's not MBTI too, let's say they took an Enneagram test, you're not going to say that everyone gets their Enneagram test right. Someone's going to say that they're a type 2 and you're like, oh, you really don't seem like a type 2 from my whole life of knowing you. And you're probably right, because your gut knows best unless a person hides a part of themselves. It's the same thing with test results. Someone might take a emotional intelligence test and score really high, but you know that person in real life and you know that they're not very emotionally intelligent with how they deal with clients or friends. So tests all have error rates. And I think that there's a human need to sometimes find a savior in test results because we want to be able to trust or have faith in something. But the truth is we actually have to do the work to make sure that these results are actually real. So it's not just a problem with the MBTI test, it's a problem with all tests.
Yeah, I agree with that. So like saying like you're going to go to see an MBTI practitioner and you're certain, or you really think that you're one type. It seems like a lot of people want to be INTJs and INFJs, but I don't think they really know the rough side of being so rare and so misunderstood. So if they go and say, well, I'm an INFJ, but they're really like an INFP or something like that, and they go to the MBTI practitioner and they answer like an INFJ, is that something that you guys come across a lot?
It happens, definitely. Especially with 16 personalities, it has a bias towards introvert and intuitive types, specifically the result of INFJ. So a lot of results are biased towards scoring those dichotomies on the test. And so people will come in thinking that they're that type. And so they might be, but I'm just trying to say all the cognitive biases out of what I'm seeing in the world, not aiming it at any certain person at all. And so I find that I enjoy being an MBTI practitioner, but I find that when you get a practitioner to double check your results, they might go too easy. So they might go like, oh, I see your results, and they'll show you descriptions of possible types you could be based off those results. So the most common types to get that result. But they're going to let you kind of land, which is helpful in some cases, but in some cases it's not as thorough as I would like it to be, which is why I combine that approach with personality hackers conversational profiling. So I'm putting them through the rigor of a questioning process that is kind too, because I don't want to interrogate people. But it adds a certain level of, I'm not just going to hand them the result that they want. I really want to make sure that it's correct. And then I combine it with Linda Barron's interaction styles and also a bit of the 8-function model approach too. So I just use everything to see if I can double confirm that someone is typed correctly.
Okay, I was talking to an ESTJ not too long ago, and he subscribes to being an ESTJ, but he's very skeptical of typology, but he's very into like ocean and the big five and stuff like that. What would you say to skeptics of typology or MBTI?
Ooh, the 16 personalities is basically a big five test. There is a correlation between the Jungian types and a little bit of it with big five. So what the big five is the 5 aggregate traits that if you take every personality trait that you can find and you aggregate them into 5 categories, you will get the ocean. So these are the most universal traits, because if you boil everything down, it'll come down to these 5 dichotomous things. Or it's not dichotomies, it's a spectrum, my bad. And so this is a really controversial view. Because I think that there might be overlap between the 16 types and the big five in some ways, not in all ways. And I think that's what makes it also universally credible too, because the big five is the most universally credible measurement. And so the 16 types also has that interlaced, which means that it has universal properties just like the ocean. It's just that it uses slightly different measurements. So for instance, openness in the ocean is not just intuition versus sensing. It is also J versus P as well. Types that score very, so ESTPs actually can score very high in openness because they lead with SE, which is very open to new experiences.
Yeah.
And so the 16 types actually do contain elements of these universal indicators, but in quirky ways. And there's a way, if someone is ingenuitive, that's not a word, they're able to combine these two things. It's possible to an extent. And I think that if they believe in the ocean, there's also some correlation with the 16 types, although that is a really controversial take. And I'm not sure if I did it justice by how I explained it, but I thought I would just mention that because
I think with NI, like we just kind of see where everything's correlated, almost everything can connect in some way or form. So I don't think that's, incorrect. I think a lot of people would have trouble seeing the correlation between the two. And it seems like, one side goes to one or one side goes to the other. I just don't really agree with, I think, there's 5 traits. And I mean, like, I don't really think like assertiveness that's seen as an extroverted trait, but yeah, I think introverts can be actually pretty assertive, like an ISTP, they can be pretty assertive. An INTJ can be pretty assertive.
Yeah, it's true. Jeff, there's a component of the MBTI and it's called the step 3. People don't know about it because you have to be a trained psychologist or someone with really specific credentials to enter the 3rd step of the program. But what it actually is you'll have a 5th part to the code. And it is actually the neuroticism in the big 5, but in MBTI's own way. And so, so there is a correlation there, some sort of weird correlation.
Yeah, there's always, I just love pitting all these correlations in my head. And it's kind of a lonely thing because it's hard to find people to talk about this sort of thing with. But yeah, that's one thing I was going to ask you too. I mean, it seems like the most information we have with like MBTI, 16 personalities, whatever, these things are just so lumped together anymore. It's like the assertive and the turbulent. How do you think like development and mental illness and personality disorders kind of fleshes in with type, like having unhealthy and healthy types, immature, mature, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, mental illness can make typing a little more complicated. For instance, with ADHD, it can make it seem like you have SE and NE when you don't actually. And for some people, it can actually amplify certain traits too. So if someone has extroverted intuition, it can be amplified by the fact that they have ADHD. It's just on crack now. So it can make it more noticeable or create false positives there too. There's also,
oh, go ahead.
There's also other personality illnesses. I don't want to call it that, but I don't know what other word to put it as. And I just want to kind of find a more I want to find a way to respect people that have it, but I don't know how else to name it because I'm an ignorant person. I'm so sorry, anyone, if I butcher this section. And so there's also bipolar and borderline personality disorder. And sometimes when people have these illnesses, it can get easily mistyped as introverted feeling because it can look like someone who's very into their values or feelings and have that like up and down mood swing that a lot of them have. And so it can either cause someone who doesn't have FI to look like they have FI, or it can cause someone who has FI to have even more amplified FI. So it looks like an even more exaggerated case of someone who uses introverted feeling.
That's very interesting that you brought that up. I have a very, that's something that I'm fleshing out in my own head. I'm trying to get more information. I don't think my NI has enough information on it yet, is personality type and personality disorder specifically. So I'm really trying to get into avoidant personality disorder, but it's very hard to find people to talk to with avoidant personality disorder, as you'd imagine. And that's why it's so overlooked and understudied. But I did talk to somebody who claimed to be an INFP and had borderline personality disorder, but they kind of came off more INFJ-ish. I know that's probably like the two of the biggest mistype types is INFP and INFJ, kind of like but yeah, he had borderline personality disorder, but he came off after I was like editing the podcast and stuff. He definitely came off more INFJ. So you think that's interesting that you brought that up?
Yeah, that totally changes the playing field because people who have borderline are very expressive and very alluring and seductive sometimes. And so it can look like extroverted feeling or what people would characterize as extroverted feeling too. So that makes sense, Jeff. I've typed a lot of people, so I've found correlations among certain mental illnesses and type 2. And people who have told me that they had avoidant personality disorder tend to be people in the introvert and thinking dichotomy. So INTJ, INTP, ISTP, and ISTJ are most likely to have it, but any type can have it. I'm just saying that it crowds around those 4 types the most.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It seems like borderline personality disorder. I know they have something that's called quiet borderline personality disorder, which isn't like an official diagnosis, which a DSM-5. DSM-5 is just a big conglomeration of, it's just so confusing and convoluting, I think, in a lot of ways. But yeah, like seems like ESTPs and ESFPs, they're very prone to getting like the borderline, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. It can cause mistyping sometimes. I had a client who had borderline and they were typed as an ESFP, but they didn't think that it fit. So they came in to get typed by me. And so we ended up typing them as ESTP, and that fit way better for them. And it was surprising because borderline can make someone look way more emotional than you would typically think of their type. So an ESTP with borderline is going to be way more SEFE. They're going to be way more impulsive and way more emotionally oriented. So you're going to hear way more of that FE with an ESTP with borderline.
Oh, you think so? Okay,
Yeah.
that's very cool. So have you typed a lot of INTJs with mental illnesses, and how did that kind of manifest in your own personal experience, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I've typed a few with mental illnesses for sure. I find that it's nice to know about so I can kind of get a feel for, because sometimes I want to know if mental illness trends with certain types because I have this morbid desire to know how type affects what you're more prone to. And with mental illness, I find with attachment style, I'll come across INTJs, the most likely attachment style they'll have is avoidant. And then the second most likely is anxious avoidant. But I've never met an anxious INTJ.
Really?
Yet. I could be proven wrong. And they tend to be mostly 5-wing 4s or type 1s in the Enneagram. For the most part, they aggregate around those Enneagram types, but they can also be 3s too. So it's up to that specific INTJ.
I'm actually a 5-wing 6. I don't know a whole lot about Enneagram. I read like a book or two on it. I don't think it was the highest quality book on it. How would a 5-wing 4 and a 5-wing 6 compare for an INTJ?
Yeah, those are very common Enneagram types for the INTJ personality. So with the 5-wing 4, you're going to have an INTJ that is a little more into their FI.
Mhm.
Type 4 just has a really strong FI connotation to it. So it's someone who has that eccentric side, that individualistic side on full blow. So it's a more tertiary function leaning INTJ. With the NITE more heavy ones, they might be more prone to scoring 516. 516 is basically insight and analysis, being able to troubleshoot problems, having that eloquence with finding where things could potentially go wrong and being able to rectify them or make sure they're not a problem before they even happen. So it has more of a TE proactive stance to certain issues. So you're going to see that difference between INTJs, but they typically tend to be 5s or 1s, a majority of INTJs.
Really ones. I don't think what's a 1 is kind of like a stereotypical like ENTJ, ESTJ, isn't it? Like kind of like really controlling, in charge sort of thing.
A 1 is more of a perfectionist.
Perfectionist. Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense for INTJs.
Yeah.
What's your Enneagram?
Uh, that's a complicated journey. So I'm either a 6-wing 5 that's self-preservation, sexual, or I just have post-traumatic stress disorder and I'm really a 9 sexual. So I'm still trying to figure that out because a lot of 6 qualities just look like PTSD too, which I definitely have. And so that can interfere with typing.
Yeah, for sure. I think PTSD is something that's just really underlooked. I think like I'm a big skeptic of ADHD, and I've upset some people with this, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody with ADHD or dismiss it, but I think ADHD is often PTSD. I think they have very similar symptoms, and I think it's treated very differently, and people just kind of like, well, here's your Adderall, and they kind of ignore the other symptoms that are going along with it.
Yeah, there are some people who would agree with you, like Gabor Mate. He talks about the wisdom of trauma. So a lot of illnesses are actually trauma-based, but people treat it as a drug-based illness. So they give you drugs for it, it helps to a certain extent, but it's not treating the root of the problem, which is trauma and solving that. And so I think that would be a way more effective cure for a lot of people who deal with certain mental illnesses if trauma was seen as the ultimate core of it.
Yeah, what was that guy's name again?
Gabor Mate. I think he's an INFJ.
Okay. I know I was reading some on Dr. Bruce Perry. He talks a lot about that as well. It's very interesting.
Yeah. It can be very woo-woo to some people though.
Yeah. But like one very good book, it's very, very sad. It's The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. It's just like a story of kids that he's worked with who've been traumatized, and kind of like how he's uses a neurosequential model, therapeutics model to kind of help heal the brain and stuff like that. It's a very interesting model. It's getting pretty popular down here. I don't know about up there.
I have not heard of it. So it kind of sounds like he was a feral child, though. I sometimes feel like I'm a feral child in the sense that I felt like I've been raised by wolves in a certain extent. Like I haven't really been in a humane type. Well, no, I've been in a humane environment, but oftentimes I feel a bit feral, like that guy that you mentioned, because of upbringing, and that's traumatic and unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's just something that's very overlooked and stuff. I think there's a huge correlation between typology and trauma, and that's kind of something I want to investigate. Like right now, I was going to get my bachelor's in psychology, but I took a break to kind of get this launched and hopefully become self-sufficient off this, because I have a very chaotic life with a kid and working full time and all this and stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan.
All right. So I want to talk a little about the functions. I'm more into the 8-function model, John Beebe specifically. And I believe the shadow. And I think that's where kind of like if you're traumatized and stunted and kind of misunderstood, you're kind of in the shadow. And I think that leads a lot of mistyping. We talked a little bit about your NI. So how exactly is it? I know for me, I kind of have I'm very, have a hard time saying this, but I do it all the time now with the podcast and stuff. But I kind of have like this inner voice that I kind of have a conversation with. So I don't want to sound schizophrenic or anything. And I see things will play out in front of me like a movie almost. Or how does your NI work for you, like intrinsically?
Yeah, it comes in the form of visions sometimes. So sometimes I can feel a sense of certainty down a path because I already see a glimpse of the vision. I may not have the details filled in, but I have this sense, this impression that I follow of what will be. And so that is a strong pull. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there's any like prophetic element to it at all? Because I know it's supposed to be like kind of like where SI works, where you kind of see things throughout your life and you kind of put the connection together for more of a future-based perspective. But I know one time I was driving to the gym and I had this flash in my head of these guys just jumping me. And I've never seen these people before, and it told me not to go. So the next day I went and I saw those same people that I've never seen before in the vision.
Mm.
But nothing happened to me that day. So I don't know if I just went that day and that time, maybe I would have got stomped out by a bunch of people, but I never seen those people in my life, but I did in my vision. Then I saw them the next day.
Yeah,
Ever had anything like that happen?
could definitely be NI. It could also be human intuition too. And I don't know for sure which one it is. You might just be an exceptionally psychic individual, Jeff.
Oh, clairvoyant. So what's the difference between human intuition and introverted intuition? You think there's a difference?
Sometimes with introverted intuition, it's collecting information in the background, and sometimes it'll synthesize patterns and you don't really know how you made sense of something, but you just realize the conclusion and then it comes to be and manifest. So that is introverted intuition to a certain extent, but I wonder if how much of it is a partial human phenomenon too. And so I wonder if you're well attuned to your gut, if you can just naturally tell things that are very similar to NI, or if having NI amplifies that too.
I personally think they're tied together. I think a lot of people, like an ESFJ has like NI trickster, or ESTJ has NI trickster, and they just don't really have that element to them about their own personal cognition for the future, it seems like.
Yeah. That's very true. With the shadow functions, it is really good for trauma work. So good on you for using it for that and for life as well. So yeah, I'm wondering if you're going to go into the shadow functions then, so maybe we could talk about that if you want.
Yeah, I kind of go down the line. I know you talked about your ego stack a little bit. I'll just kind of get a little more in depth with it. So FE is something I think I'm very, very stunted on FE, and it's my trickster function, blind spot, whatever you want to call it. So I understand it on paper, but I really don't understand it on a fundamental level, it seems like. So I could kind of like, okay, it's like, even picking up on people's emotions, very concerned about making people feel good and stuff like that. Is that something that you developed later on, or is that something that it's always been with you, you think?
I notice it. So when people are feeling bad, that actually impacts me because I absorb people's emotions around me. So what happens if people around me are feeling negative and I can source it, then I'm going to not want to make sure that that happens again because it just directly impacts me. It's almost like you have a chip and everyone else has a chip. When they get punched, you get punched too. And so you're going to want to also look after group well-being because you don't want people to get hurt because it's very obvious to you. And so sometimes with FE in INTJs, it's interesting because they may not be as apt to read other people's emotions. Sometimes it has to be explicitly said out loud for them to fully register another person's emotions. And sometimes when you do try to infer someone's emotion, you're not sure if you're projecting your own experience onto them or if they're actually feeling that. So it's like, oh, are they actually feeling that? Or am I feeling that? And kind of putting it onto how I think they might be experiencing it.
Yeah, I think one thing that we're really guilty of is rationalizing people's emotions because we just don't pick it up intrinsically. So we're kind of like using our TI for them to find a solution. And they feel like that we're kind of like know-it-alls, but we're really just trying to help them. So
Mm,
they're just wanting someone to kind of like validate them and make them feel like, what they're feeling is real. So that's like a big struggle that we have.
yeah. So sometimes there's a bluntness.
Yeah, say the least. And I had like study like facial expressions and micro expressions and things like that, like really heavily to kind of fill that gap in my life, I think. I don't know if this is really common for all INTJs, but like I said, with my AvPD, I think it really, really stunted in that. And I just wasn't, brought up socially. So I think that's just like a big hole I had to fill personally. I had to use my TE to learn these processes to kind of pick up on these cues, basically.
Yeah. So you learned to read micro expressions better because you worked proactively at your weaknesses. You're a good example of INTJ growth.
Am I? Well, I'm glad I'm trying to get there. It's very, very difficult for me. I had another tangent. Oh yeah, like I think the lack of FE, I think we're stereotypically looked as like autistic and even like being like a psychopath or sociopath. That's something I've been very accused of a lot. I think a lot of mental illness, like if you don't fit the SJ paradigm, you're not like them. They kind of like, okay, there's something wrong with you.
Mm,
Do you ever get that feeling?
yeah, if you're not like someone else, there's something wrong with you. It's a concept that Linda Behrens talks a lot
Yeah.
about. It's be like me and be like them.
Mm-hmm.
So people subconsciously want you to be more like them, and they judge you for being deficient if you're not more like them. Uh, so you could see this in the form of growing up in my life. Everyone in my family is a dominant sensor. And so what has happened is they notice how bad I am with details. And so they assume that Joyce is bad at details, so she's bad at everything. Because if you can't even do this, then you can't do anything. And that was the core assumption that my immediate family had of me always. And I could see it in their eyes. It sucks when you're FB and you can read exactly how someone feels about you on their face. It just hits even more. And so that was a really visceral experience of be like me, because they thought that if you don't even have these basic skills they consider people to have, you're not good at anything, which is just not true. Your brain is just allocating power at a different part of your brain. And so by paying more attention to the patterns and the underlying meaning of life, you sometimes overlook details or you try to skim over them to get to the overarching theme of things. And so oftentimes, be like me has been the kryptonite of my existence, because it's been why people find it okay to bully other people. It's like, you're not like me, therefore I can bully you until you become more like me, which ultimately doesn't turn you more into them. It just traumatizes you, which is why there are so many traumatized people in the world, because a lot of us have been under the pain of be like me from someone else.
And I think it's a very worldwide or even Western culture like epidemic, really, because the SJs are just in so much control. And I think that's just like, oh, I think like, going to the get things started types. I think they're all like very ADHD like you were
Yes.
saying. And I think a lot of them get labeled as ADHD. So like, oh, you're not like us. You can't sit down and read a book for 6 hours straight in class, because that's what our school system is basically. Not to trash SJs or anything. This is kind of just the reality of things in my view. Maybe it's an unhealthy thing. I don't know. But I don't think it's just right, because people are very personality based. And just because, an ESFP, they're made more like performance based, or even like work on cars or carpentry, they're not meant to sit in a classroom all day every day. And I think
Yeah.
we have like our own guide and our own path. We could have people individuate and
Mhm.
self-actualize, or whatever the term you want it is,
Yeah.
and people can flourish.
Yeah. I think it's tragic how some people are set up to fail in certain systems.
Yeah.
For people that you mentioned, they might not flourish in an environment that's very boring to them and not stimulating, because they have a lot of pent up energy. And so, what is happening, they might be somewhere where they're set up to fail, either in the school system or in a work environment or in their relationships. And the blame might be pinned on them, Whereas it's just an environmental issue. And maybe if the environment was more conducive to their natural impulses, then they wouldn't be suffering so much. So there's so much unnecessary suffering in the world. And I believe type has the potential to address all of that unnecessary suffering and to create a more compassionate world.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Like, I think even in my extended family, I was the only intuitive. Both my mom and stepdad, she might have been just so shadow based. My mom, I think she was an ESFP, but she kind of came off more like ISFP, but I think they were both ESFPs, my mom and stepdad. My biological dad, who I don't have a lot of contact with, was definitely an ESTP, and my grandparents and uncle, my grandpa and uncle, and a lot of ESFP, SE DOMs. It was my family. So everyone's like, why are you so weird? Like, because I would just sit there and just read encyclopedias when I was like 7 years old instead of, out playing sports where I wasn't allowed to play sports. But I always got like hammered, like, why aren't you just like normal? Like, why don't you work on this car? Or why don't you play with these toys? And I was just more like, even that drove people crazy, just asking questions like, why this, why that? I was also very, very inquisitive. Like Kiersey talks about, like, like the rationals, even when they're really young, they're like, why does this work? How does this work?
Mhm.
And I was always like that. It just triggered everybody.
Yeah. And when you trigger them, they try to push you into your place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is traumatizing.
Yeah, for
And can
sure.
sometimes, in some people, create avoidant personality disorder. So sometimes it may not have been as severe, but then as people kind of judge you for this natural thing that you have, it can make you recluse even more.
Yeah, I kind of feel myself like trying to get out of this avoidant personality disorder, and kind of a part of myself just going like schizoid, just like I don't even want relationships. I don't even want people. I just kind of like throwing my hands in the air. And I'm not trying to go that way because I have a 5-year-old son and I want him to have a better life. I'm thinking he's going to be an ESF, he's going to be an SE Dom too, one of the two, I think, pretty sure what it's looking like. So I'm, like he's very social and he has these needs. So I force myself to go out and, have him socialize and let him be the person that he's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. The schizoid personality disorder is also correlated with Enneagram type 5, which is also correlated with introvert and thinking dichotomy types too.
Yeah. I think they're very similar with the AvPD and the schizoid, are similar in a lot of ways, except the people with avoidant personality really want relationships, where the schizoids don't want those relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they can tie in both. And a lot of people who have AvPD just kind of give up eventually and just become schizoid, it seems like, and they're the stereotypical hermit out in the forest, I guess.
Yeah. So sometimes that's caused by when interacting with people can feel like being shocked with an electric fence. And you're like, every time I try to have a civil interaction with people or to have a productive conversation or to stimulate my mind in some way, it always ends poorly. And so you're going to have this electric fence tied to your thought of interacting with people. And over time, that can create disorders.
Yeah. These are just like personality disorders are very, very bad habits, coping mechanisms that kind of used when you're usually younger. And now that you're older, they're not serving a very good purpose anymore. And they're just lifelong patterns that are just hard to get out of, I think.
They are. Yeah.
Basically what a personality disorder is in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's kind of get through this. I know you have another live stream coming up, so I don't want to keep you. So let's dive a little bit more into your TI. That's something that's kind of not really strong in myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's wanting to understand the framework of people. So when you're giving me FE information, what I'm automatically doing is I'm putting it into the framework of how I understand you to be as a person. So right now I have notes within my mind of my TI framework. So Jeff, he has avoidant personality disorder and he's afraid of developing schizoid personality disorder. And I'm like, why is that? And then I'm like kind of trying to get more dots or clues to figure out you as an abstract version of who you are. So I'm trying to formulate a complete understanding of your personality through the information that you're giving me to get a better sense of your core and what makes you tick. It's almost like my favorite pastime is NITIing, figuring out what is the mechanism within you, your purpose for being alive. What do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment, your greatest failure? What makes you cry and what makes you happy? I want to like figure it all out like it's a jigsaw puzzle, and I'm trying to put it in the puzzles in the right place. And so TI is actually a very intricate way of understanding people. So it's wanting to understand the thoroughness of your reactions and how it makes the composite image of your potential. And so I want to use this puzzle to figure out how to best help you reach your potential that you were meant to live in your life. But you're probably already doing that. But I also want to help you with that too, in whatever way I can. But that typically comes from a very TI place of understanding the ingredients that make you who you are. So I kind of see you as a very intricate cake. And I'm trying to figure out, all right, there's cherry pasting here, there's chocolate filling there, there's flour here and egg here. And I'm trying to figure out how to make the recipe that is you. So it's finding the recipe behind human systems and then projecting it forward with NI.
I know this is something that we talked a little bit about in the big thing with Kisio Chan we did last week. I don't think that's out on YouTube yet. Like we're talking about like looping and jumping, whatever you want to call it. And it's not always a negative thing, right?
Yeah, for some people, it's just a way of life for them. It doesn't have to be negative, unless it's impacting them in a poor way.
How as an INFJ, how can your NITI loop kind of bog you down?
You can over intellectualize things instead of actually putting them in a feeling space. You actually get very analytical and cold about it. And it can prevent you from truly accessing your FI actually. So when you're in an NITI loop, it might prevent you from feeling because you think the solution to problems is thinking them through fully, which is not the solution to human problems sometimes. So it can be used as a safety relief function where you can use it as a hobby to avoid fully feeling. So it can promote a sense of numbness.
Yeah, I think like INFJs, INTJs, they can be the most useless of the types or the most useful of the types, basically.
Mhm.
So like I like me, like I see all these things that I want and desire in a very, very end goal down decades, at the end of my life or whatever, but I get caught in my FI and I'm like, I'm not good enough for this, or this is too much work. And I kind of just like don't mope, I kind of mope around and just don't take any action.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about SC. I know SC inferior is something that we can share, kind of come off looking bad, sounding bad. How have you gotten over that? And how have you developed your SE over the years?
Yeah, with my extroverted sensing, I have a lot of SE Dom friends, and I find the best way to develop a function is to be around people who have that function, or they can make your life a living nightmare. Either one is the
Yeah,
case.
for sure.
So I have this friend who's like, we're gonna go skydiving. I don't care, Joyce. No is not an answer. So apparently I have to go skydiving, cries to myself.
Have you done it yet?
Not yet, nope.
No. Something I always thought about trying, but never done.
Mm. And so risk taking within a controlled space is one of the ways you can improve your SE. Another one is, well, a bad habit I have is energy drinks. Right now I'm like drinking a Rockstar because I'm a little bit low energy, and so it helps me get through the day.
Yeah.
Now, the SE can see indulgence as not a problem sometimes. So I could be ruining my body with energy drinks, but I also don't care too because I am not looking out for that bodily comfort or that bodily sign that it may not be okay. So if SE is taken to too much of an extreme, it can actually ruin your body. And so it's good to sometimes do it in moderation and to not mess up your system long term.
I think that's where the shadow comes in. It's like SI demon. SI is more about like kind of like disciplining yourself and self-care and safety and things like that. And I think we do these things that we know that were bad for us, but they're like a coping skill or things like that. Like, like for me, like it's overeating. So I know like overeating is going to cause me to have health issues, and it has in the past, but I do it anyways because I just don't care. Kind of like I don't really care about my own personal health and comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be an issue. I have an issue with overeating as well. I'm
Yeah.
really prone to it. And so a way to get over that is to tame that SE, put a color on that SE and tell it to sit, boy. Yeah.
Do you think having SI users to kind of model off helps at all in that aspect?
It can help, but it can also be nagging and annoying, and it might make you want to do it more
Yeah.
because you want to disrespect the SI. It has to be done by someone who's not annoying.
Yeah, I think somebody who kind of understands, like, kind of as a model and not just as a disciplinary, like that, especially like the
Yeah.
SITE is kind of something that really triggers me.
Uh-huh. It triggers me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because with my shadow TE, I get turned off by a really strong TE paired with SI sometimes. When it's paired with Enneagram type 1, that's just a nightmare because they're like, my way is the right way. And it's painful. But not all. Yeah, not all people, just saying a specific few within that slot.
We want to get down the shadow a little bit, at least how I interpret it. It makes sense to me. So any opposing personality, it kind of opposes your NI. INJs, they're kind of paranoid. They kind of see like the negative outcomes. Like I'll lay in my bed for hours. I think of like all the scenarios that can go wrong with my son and how he can get hurt and how he can get sick and things like that. And it keeps me up at night. Or I think about like how people could betray me or something like that. Has that been like a reoccurring thing for you?
That's where type correlates with Enneagram types too, because people would also call that 6 behavior. So that's why 5 wing 6 makes sense. For me, I would say I see one negative pathway sometimes. And sometimes when the extroverted intuition comes in and has all these possibilities, it can make me lose sight of the vision. So if people throw too much NE my way, I get confused and disbobulated because then the vision starts to become blurry when people start throwing me, oh, it could be this. What if this? What if this? I lose the clear vision of something. I guess the way opposing extroverted intuition can also show up is I might have this one NI vision for something, and I'll try to justify it through NE sometimes. So it's like, this NI makes sense because of opposing NE. Look, this reason, but it might just be throwing reasons out there. Could be.
Yeah, I think that's one thing too, like the see it through types, they have trouble starting things because I think that's just a big anything. There's like so many paths you could take to start and you just don't know where to start. And like the get things started types just have trouble finishing things too.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
They just kind of have a hard time knuckling down and getting through it. I know how much time you have left? About 15 minutes?
I have, yeah.
Okay. We'll go through FI a little bit. So like if you can't make people feel good or you feel real worthless, that's kind of how it manifests in the shadow from a lot of INFJs, ISFJs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about I kind of got that messed up. Your TE. Do you find it hard to do like very data TE driven things?
It can be. Yeah. One of the ways it shows up in the trickster spot too is that you might think that you're doing it well, but you're actually not doing it well. Yeah. So
I know I was trying to show an INFJ that I was dating this, and it was very like I was doing it in a very TE way. And I think it was just really, really overwhelming for her.
yeah. It's that meme with the math equations everywhere and going like, what the heck is TE?
Yeah.
I'll start my type talks shows with TJs telling me, hey, you know what, Joyce, I'll structure this whole thing for you. And they'll go like boom, 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 and have the to-do list for the day. And I'm like, wow, that is extremely structured. And so it's kind of like, whoa.
A little much for you?
Yes.
Okay, for time's sake, I know we went over SID even a little bit about kind of like energy drinks and overdoing it with those. So these are just some closing questions I ask. I don't know if these are the right questions, not very FE probably oriented. Do you have a favorite type?
I used to think that I was ISTP, but I really think sometimes it depends on the individual, because I've met some ISTPs that really I don't like. But some of them I really do like. There just tends to be this natural chemistry spark when it is the right ISTP. Now my favorite type is ENFJ. I like them because their FE helps me develop my FE. So it's almost like they help me become the better version of myself. And they're warm and friendly. John Beebe says that FE is very good for people with psychosis because it's very calm and nurturing and loving and reaffirming and validating. And I feel that way around ENFJs. They're really good at making you feel loved instantly. And so ENFJ.
Very cool. And what about your least favorite type?
I don't have a least favorite type. I like the types.
Okay. And as an INFJ or as a person, as just yourself, what would you like others to know about you?
Yeah, I would say find people who speak your language so you don't spend a lifetime translating your soul. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with you. You might just be a package delivered to the wrong address. So maybe someone else who got you as a package would really want you, and that you're the perfect package for a certain household, but maybe you're not one for a different household, and that there's nothing wrong with you or inherently deficient in you if life treats you that way. Because being a small portion of the population or being misunderstood just in general in your life. So I'm just speaking to types that may not feel common in their household. Whether they could even be a censor in a household of intuitives, that could be rough too.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with you as a person, and that whatever you were meant to be, you were meant to be that. And so as an INFJ, I would want people to know that you have potential as a human being, and don't let anyone convince you out of it, because it sucks living your life as a watered down version of you. You don't want to live as a 10% version of you. On your deathbed. It'll feel very unsatisfying to know that you were never what you were meant to be in your lifetime. And so it's good to just try to be that right now, even though it's so hard. You might have your defenses up and your coping mechanisms up, like what we were talking about earlier, but someone out there will appreciate you and what you have to offer the world. It's kind of like your bat signal, just like how Batman has that bat signal that people use to call for him. If you become what you were meant to be, it'll naturally attract the people who are meant to find you. And so you'll live more in your purpose by being the person you were meant to be, even if you think no one wants it yet. And so oftentimes life is set up in a way where we can feel unwanted or unloved or not worthy of goodness in our lives. And it's a false message. And I find that might be why some people get into typology, because it helps make sense of their life. And so they don't have to feel misunderstood because they feel understood by type. And so as an INFJ, I wish the experience of feeling understood onto everyone in their own way. Everyone should feel seen, understood, valued, heard in their lifetime, or else it can result in a lot of things that look like mental illness but are not. Maybe you can have something that looks like a certain thing, but it's really because at a certain point of your life you experienced trauma from this life circumstance around you. And so the best way to figure out who you are is to be in a situation or an environment or with people who make you feel loved, cared about, and fully human with them. Because then you'll be able to figure out who you really are at your core. And so that's the message I would just leave people off with. And I'd also say I'm not invalidating mental illness. Like you can also be born with mental illness too. So I'm not like some people are just genetically predisposed to it as well. And I don't mean to write those people off. But there are also this subsection of people who have it because of trauma too. And I think that isn't talked about too. So I just overemphasize this during the session as well.
Very well put. This is a question that I ask everybody. I'm sure you know a lot about INTJs because of your background, but do you want to know anything about INTJs?
Yeah, I want to know how it's like to be an INTJ that's separate from the INFJ experience. Where do you find the difference between you and INFJs?
I think it's a very big question. I mean, definitely like the TE is our father mother function, auxiliary function, where yours is FE, and we kind of have that. It's in the others is in the trickster, like you have TE trickster, I have FE trickster. So I think that's a big thing. I think we kind of just stack it, with our NI a lot different. Then I guess we're kind of more in our own emotions rather than you're concerned about other people's emotions as an INFJ. So I think those are like the biggest differences that I see. I think we're more like systems and structure oriented, and you're more people oriented.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not interested in systems unless it's related to people.
Yeah. And I think I naturally just make people systems because I just don't understand people on a fundamental level.
Yeah.
So I got to use like a system like typology to understand people because I just didn't understand people.
Yeah. It's a great tool for people who want to understand people more. I oftentimes have IT types say that exact thing that you said. I like to use personality systems like this to understand people more because I don't naturally understand people.
Yeah.
And it's also that trickster FE as well.
All right. Well, I think that's all that I have. Do you have anything else for me?
Oh no, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I was really surprised you wanted to because your channel is just so much bigger than mine.
Well,
All right.
I appreciate your format. You're really good at making people divulge about their opinions and their thoughts. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm definitely trying to figure out a system and a direction for my channel. It's pretty young still, so I'm getting there. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Just want to remind you could add me on social media, INTJ equation all around, most active on Instagram. You could also join our Discord server. Go ahead and subscribe to Joyce's channel and check out her content. It's very informative, and she talks to people from all walks of life, all different types. And she might talk to like an INTJ versus INFJ, or have like an INFJ and an ISFP, people of the same quadras, same temperament, same interaction styles all together. So it's very cool. A bunch of people bouncing ideas off each other and kind of comparing and contrasting. So I think it's a really good idea.
I'm also planning to have an interaction styles series this month. So I'm going to be going through Chart the Course, get things going in charge and behind the scenes sometime soon. So you can check that out if you want to learn more about that.
Very cool. Like I said earlier in the interview, it's a very overlooked aspect in typing. So I think it's a very important piece that's missing.
Agreed.
All right. Well, thank you for going on a clickbait, and have a great day.